All right. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the School of Wrestling podcast. Today on the podcast, I'm going to discuss philosophy and why I think philosophy is actually important. And so recently, I've been posting a couple podcasts that I did with Heather Reed, who is the author of a book called The Philosophy of Sport. I've spoke to Josh Jebba about this. I've talked to Coach Slack, Brian Krenzalak, about this. Um, this idea of creating philosophy around participating in the sport of wrestling. And the reason why I think this is extremely important is because there's two ways to think about it, right? So you can either do something with intention, right? And so someone would call that with discipline. You're choosing to do things, right, a certain way in order to get some sort of certain outcome, right, out of it. Or you can do it in a default way where you're not choosing to do something intentionally. You just do things in some sort of natural unfolding process. So you just respond to your instincts as opposed to your conscious mind, right? And so the conscious mind is different than the instinctual mind, right? The human instinct is to provide pleasure, to do things for the personal satisfaction of the self, right? And so the discipline allows you to suspend short-term seeking of that pleasure to achieve something that you could view as a greater good, right? So, for instance, obviously, losing weight, right? If you want to be on a diet, you have to discipline yourself. You have to forego the pleasures of eating, sweet or sugary foods that provide instant pleasure to your brain and excite yourself in order to participate in things that provide a greater good for you in the long term, right? And then later they can actually turn into pleasures, right? But in the process of transitioning from seeking pleasure to seeking some sort of pleasure through a disciplined approach, you kind of have to suspend this willingness to go through good things and go through difficult things, right? And through that difficulty, you achieve positive things, right? And so the reason why I think philosophy is important in the sport of wrestling is because as a coach, as a former college athlete, what I've seen is that there is no philosophy. There is no one, or there is not a collective body of people enacting or engaging in a common philosophy. The common engagement is the default of chasing objects, right? Chasing accomplishment, chasing accolades, chasing financial and economic success, right? Chasing celebrity, chasing the idea of people being entertained and excited about the act of wrestling, right? And so, because of that, I think there are far more negatives that come with that approach as opposed to if we developed a philosophy for our participation in the sport. And so, philosophy of sport is kind of general, right? You can have a philosophy of sport in all other sports, but obviously for me, I want to create a philosophy for the sport of wrestling. I want to give a reason to people as to why they should participate in wrestling. And so one of the things that I think is quite interesting is that when the Olympics dropped or decided to drop the sport of wrestling in the Olympics, you had a large pushback from the community of wrestlers and people involved in wrestling to keep this involved in the Olympics. And when they started to push back and to argue on behalf of the sport and why it should be included in the Olympic Games, people used all of the beneficial aspects that would come or potentially could come with the involvement of sport, right? So, for instance, wrestling can provide individuals with skill sets like or virtues, for instance, of hard work and perseverance and resilience, right? These things of character building traits, right? And they're fully accurate with using those as justifications as to why people should not only participate in this sport, but why this sport should have precedence over maybe other sports, right? Why wrestling is so special, right? And so I love the fact that we as a collective group were championing these ideas, right? So we were actually focused on the what would be called internal goods of the practice of wrestling, right? What are the things that contribute to the self that cannot be, um, you know, viewed as like abstractions, right? Superficial things, right? And these internal goods are things that um, can come without having a philosophy, but they require at some point philosophy to acknowledge those things as the the goods of choice, right? The reason for doing things, right? Children, for instance, might not set out on the journey of wrestling in order to develop hard work. However, those that encourage that individual to set out on the journey of wrestling should have that as a philosophical principle or a goal in regards to why you would encourage others to participate. And so going into the philosophy and ancient Greeks and how I got there, I thought it was interesting that there were people in society, in very important people, right? Plato and Socrates and Aristotle. These individuals were not just regular people. These were some of the most important thinkers of their time, right? Um, you know, Plato is literally viewed as one of the most intelligent people who have ever walked the planet, right? And so because of that, he's not just a random person. He's not somebody who is talking about the use of sport, and most specifically the sport of wrestling, as a way to cultivate citizens, to cultivate people of virtue or with virtue, right? Um, and so I always thought it was really fascinating that there were people in time that actually used this sport with the sole purpose of extracting the internal goods from it, as opposed to thinking that the purpose of wrestling was to pursue some sort of accomplishment like an Olympic gold medal or an NCAA title. The purpose of engaging in the act of wrestling was to develop and cultivate virtue that very few other things could actively do as well as wrestling. And so when you think about people in periods, in other periods of time who understood this stuff, I think it's also it's also somewhat like liberating, so that you're not thinking that it's not been done before, that it's a new idea. This is not a new idea that I'm coming up with. All I'm doing is trying to focus our attention on these ideas, because they're complicated, right? So some people get involved in sport and they say, hey, it's just about the kids, right? We want to make the kids better. But they don't actively participate in the act in the correct way. They also oftentimes use the idea that it's not about the accomplishment as a way to excuse the behavior of working hard, committing to goals, being accountable, doing extra work, right? To push yourself into the hard, difficult things, right? The disciplined approach of sacrificing short-term pleasures in order to cultivate something that provides long-term happiness, right? And so I think from what I've seen as a coach, I've seen oftentimes, the power example, right? So oftentimes we have coaches, we have we have people, parents, leaders of young people who think it's more important to chase these goals as to you know emulate the lifestyle that we're trying to get individuals to participate in, right? So as a coach, I've seen many coaches that tell individuals to participate in nutrition, to eat a good healthy diet, or to restrict certain negative foods, right? However, at the same time that they encourage other people to do those things, they actively participate in the opposite, right? And so that means that they actually do not value the participation in the healthy lifestyle. They actually only value the use of that lifestyle in order to achieve some sort of superficial means, right? Whether it's money, awards, or fame of some kind, right? So this is important because it makes it not about the internal good. It actually makes it about the external good that doesn't have anything to do with the person going on after sport and participating in community and society as a whole. And I think this is very sad and unfortunate because it continues to explain and articulate the idea of sport, or the idea of specifically wrestling, is not for the cultivation of yourself into an individual who can actually do a whole host of other things at an extremely high level, and be able and capable and willing to go through the process, right? Instead, it actually encourages is the opposite, right? That anything you do is for the purpose of manipulating your things just so that you can get outcomes, right? And this is not helpful. I don't think this is helpful to people participating in it, as well as not being very helpful to collective society and culture outside of that, right? So, for instance, one, if you do not teach a lifestyle, right, then they will not achieve success, because success is ultimately achieved through the lifestyle. There are very few people that can achieve success without living a practical lifestyle that consistently allows for some sort of development of some kind, right? So, for instance, if you don't have a lifestyle of being in shape and exercising and lifting weights or running or practicing, right? It's hard for you to actually develop skill, or to develop the capability of developing skill, right? And and so if that's the case, then it's very unlikely that somebody's going to ultimately be successful, right? So if you want someone to be successful in the sport, we often say you have to live the lifestyle. Well, if you live the lifestyle, then you have to understand that the lifestyle itself is something that you have to engage with for a consistent period of time, for a long period of time, right? Like for an extended period of time in order to achieve results, right? And so I think that the lack of philosophy has taken away that understanding, right? People do not have philosophy as to why they participate in wrestling. Coaches don't even know, what they're coaching. They don't know why they're coaching. They don't understand why kids should try to pursue their potential in the sport. They often equate it to fun, as if like fun is not trying, right? It is. I don't think fun is not trying. I think fun is, you know, uh, it's it's just a weird statement, right? It's very hard to kind of like articulate this and go into the details. But regardless, I think that philosophy is something that is neglected. People do not have philosophy, and this podcast, for instance, I think is primarily talking to parents and coaches, because I don't think it's the place of an athlete or the place of a child to understand this type of stuff. I think it's important for adults and coaches and people around the sport itself to understand the crucial nature of sport, or the crucial nature of philosophy in sport. And if it is not achieved, then default will happen. And default is, why would you run hard if you don't have to, or if you don't value it, or if you don't think that by running hard you're going to produce some sort of positive outcome. And if you only pursue the running hard in the way to achieve some outcome, the just the sheer statistics alone will eventually erode the individual's willingness to do that thing, right? So every year there's a state tournament, but there's only 10 to 15 state champions in a given year. So eventually someone is going to not have the success that actually perpetuates the chasing of success, right? And it's not until someone who oftentimes is egoically pursuing some sort of outcome that ultimately they build a habit and lifestyle that's conducive to the achievement, right? And again, not everyone gets to achieve the award at the end. So if that's the case, then the vast majority of people are actually not going to have the incentive of doing the things that cultivate the internal goods that then you can live a prosperous life with, right? And so from sheer statistics alone, we need to develop philosophy, because if we don't develop philosophy, then the vast majority of people that are involved in the sport are ultimately not going to get the value of the sport. They're not going to develop the virtue from the sport. They're more so going to be fans of the sport. They're going to be fans of those who actually participate in the lifestyle, as opposed to participating in the lifestyle themselves. And I see this with coaches, or I see this with parents and kids. The parents don't actually see that the child should be involved in wrestling because of the positives that come with it. They want that child to be involved in the sport because of the social credit that comes with being involved in that sport and actually having success in that sport. So there is a disconnect between the intention around participating in a sport and the the process of it, right? So people are just confused, and I think that philosophy is important to making that confusion go away, right? To give people a purpose that is tied to something that's larger than silly superficial goals along the way. And I know this for myself because I've always engaged in the sport, and I've always appreciated the act of training. I've always appreciated the act of running, lifting, wrestling, grappling, challenging myself, and so on and so forth. And when it became about the accomplishments, when it became about the judgment of others, whether or not I was of virtue or not, it actually became less enjoyable, to the point where I actually quit two Division I programs. Right, I left the University of Illinois because they weren't actually making it fun. Right, they are operating through the purpose of having success as a team. And in fact, if they don't have success as a team, oftentimes the coaches get removed, which is only perpetuating the focus around the outcome, which doesn't serve the greatest good. Right, the greatest good is to serve the behaviors, because the behaviors are what produces outcomes in a general sense, as well as those are the internal goods that actually make society better. No, the society doesn't get better if somebody wins a championship. That individual has some benefits, but the collective society is not getting the benefits of that situation, right? The collective good is when there is an emphasis and focus on the development of the virtue. And that's why I really appreciate the idea of arete and how people approached arete and how they viewed arete and how arete could be accepted or pursued by a collective body of people. And so I think that philosophy is just one of those things that without it, we are left to our own humanistic devices, right? Our urges are to avoid discomfort. Our tendencies are to not be disciplined, to fall into things that are counterproductive. And so I think that philosophy is important. And so with the School of Wrestling, my goals are to expand and explain this philosophical perspective so that people can start participating in these acts without thinking solely from the external factors of winning championships or becoming a state champion or getting a college scholarship or so on and so forth. I want people to desire to engage in the act of wrestling because it makes them better, as opposed to engaging in the act of wrestling for the purpose of getting riches or some sort of superficial thing that doesn't actually make the collective better. It doesn't help anybody other than the ego of the self and those involved with the self. And so because of that, I think philosophy is needed. So we're going to continue this this conversation, and I'll have Heather read on and a few other people on to kind of discuss this stuff, just to elaborate on it. But yeah, thanks for watching, and hopefully this can help you think about things a little bit different so that you can go forward in a different way.